The moment everyone would later argue about began in a place designed to feel invisible. A concrete loading bay beneath a glass and steel campus in downtown Seattle. Fluorescent lights buzzing, rainwater dripping from car undercarriages. The kind of space executives pass through without ever really seeing. Grant Halstead saw it, or rather he saw her, and decided she shouldn't exist loudly. It happened fast. 1 second, Renee Caldwell was crouched beside an open access panel, tightening a valve on the fire suppression line. The next, a shadow fell over her shoulder, followed by a voice sharp with irritation and entitlement. "Do you know how much this delay is costing me?" She stood, slow and careful, wiping her hands on a rag. She didn't apologize. She didn't rush. She looked at him, really looked, and that, more than anything, irritated Grant Halstead. "What's your name?" he demanded. "Renee," she said, calm, neutral, no edge. Grant stepped closer, too close. His tailored coat brushed her sleeve as he gestured back toward the ramp where his driver waited, engine idling. "You people are always in the way," he said, lowering his voice, savoring the audience of security cameras and passing staff. "Always forgetting where you belong." Something flickered in Renee's eyes then. Not fear, not anger, calculation. Grant mistook it for defiance. He reached out, fingers closed around the collar of her work jacket, not quite choking her, not quite letting go either. A dominance move, a lesson, the kind he'd delivered before and never been challenged for. The bay went silent. Renee didn't gasp, didn't struggle. Her pulse stayed slow. Her eyes shifted, not to him but past him. Exit routes, reflections in car mirrors, the hum of the lights, the distance to the alarm pole. Grant felt it before he understood it, the sudden, unmistakable sense that he had made a mistake. Because the woman in front of him wasn't shrinking. She was still, centered, waiting. And in that stillness was something dangerous, something trained. Grant released her, as if burned. "You should remember your place," he snapped, louder now, as if volume could restore order. "I own this building." Renee adjusted her jacket. Her voice, when she spoke, was even. "Then you should want it safe," she said, "and you should keep your hands to yourself." People had stopped walking. Someone pretended to check their phone. A security guard meant to intervene hesitated, sensing a line had been crossed, but unsure by whom. Grant laughed, sharp and brittle. "This isn't over," he said. Renee watched him go, rain and arrogance retreating up the ramp. Only when he disappeared did she allow herself a single, steady breath. She went back to her work. What no one in that loading bay understood, not the guards, not the staff, and certainly not Grant Halstead, was that some people didn't learn restraint because they were weak. They learned it because they knew exactly how far things could go, and how ugly it became when they did. If this opening already has your pulse up, take a second to let me know. Tap like, leave a comment about where you're listening from, and follow the channel so you don't miss what comes next. Stories like this unfold fast, and you'll want to be here for every step. Because this wasn't just a bad interaction in a forgotten corner of a corporate campus. It was the first crack in a system built to protect men like Grant Halstead. And the moment he humiliated the wrong person. Halstead Urban Holdings liked to describe itself as a vision. Glass facades that caught the light just right. Sustainability slogans etched into lobby walls. Diversity statements framed beside awards for innovation and growth. To the outside world, it was the kind of company that appeared in glossy magazines and keynote speeches, a symbol of what modern American enterprise was supposed to look like. Inside, it ran on something far older. Power. Grant Halstead sat at the head of the executive conference table as if it had been built around him. Polished walnuts stretched beneath his folded hands, and a wall of windows behind him offered a panoramic view of Seattle's waterfront. Boats cutting through gray water, cranes moving with mechanical patience. The city looked small from up here, manageable. That was how Grant preferred things. "Numbers don't lie," he said, his voice smooth, practiced. "We're up 12% year over year. Tenant retention is strong, Investors are happy. A slide changed. Applause followed, restrained but obedient. Then another slide appeared, smaller font, less color. Contractor Satisfaction Index. The room shifted. Marisol Vega, seated halfway down the table, felt it before anyone spoke. She had spent years in compliance and legal oversight. She recognized the subtle tightening of posture, the collective instinct to look anywhere but directly at the problem. Maintenance and systems contractors are reporting increased complaints, the presenter said carefully, primarily around workplace interactions and Grant raised a hand. The sentence died in the air. Contractors are not our employees, he said. They are vendors. If they're unhappy, they can be replaced. Silence followed, thick and practiced. Marisol glanced around the table. Senior directors, HR leadership, people who knew better and also knew the cost of saying so. The complaints mention executive conduct, she said, choosing her words with surgical precision. Specifically patterns, repeated incidents. Grant turned his head slowly, like a man humoring a child. Patterns, he repeated, or attitudes. His smile was calm, polite, deadly. Let's be clear, he continued. This company does not have a culture problem. It has a discipline problem. And discipline is my responsibility. No one challenged him. Because Grant Halstead didn't need to shout. He didn't need to threaten openly. His power lived in margins and omissions, in contracts quietly terminated, licenses mysteriously delayed, careers that stalled without explanation. People learned quickly. Halstead Urban Holdings wasn't built on cruelty. That would have been obvious. It was built on appearances, on the careful separation of what was seen and what was absorbed. Executives were protected. Investors were insulated. Problems were settled quietly, routed through third-party firms, buried under non-disclosure agreements and mutual separations. Those who pushed back didn't get fired. They disappeared. Down on the lower levels of the campus, where mechanical rooms hummed and badge access was restricted, Renee Caldwell moved through her shift unnoticed. She calibrated pressure sensors, logged inspection data, fixed problems before they became disasters. She didn't attend town halls. She didn't appear in company newsletters. Her name didn't exist in Grant Halstead's world, except as a category, contractor, which made what had happened in the loading bay more dangerous than either of them yet understood. Because men like Grant didn't forget moments when the world failed to bend. And companies like Halstead Urban Holdings didn't correct behavior. They corrected exposure. Somewhere between the boardroom and the basement, a decision was already taking shape. Not loud, not dramatic, just inevitable. Renee Caldwell learned early that the safest way to survive certain environments was to become forgettable. She moved through Halstead Urban Holdings the way air moved through its vents. Essential, unseen, only noticed when something went wrong. Her badge didn't open executive suites. Her name didn't appear on org charts. Most days people spoke around her, over her, through her, as if she were part of the infrastructure instead of the reason it functioned. And Renee let them. She wore her hair pulled back, her clothes plain and practical, her expression neutral. Not submissive, not inviting, just quiet enough to discourage curiosity. In a place obsessed with status, invisibility was armor. But beneath that armor lived precision. Renee knew this campus better than the people who claimed to own it. She knew which stairwell doors stuck when the humidity rose, which fire sensors triggered false alarms during temperature swings, which sections of the underground garage flooded first when Seattle's rain overstayed its welcome. She knew because she'd memorized it. Not for praise, not for promotion, for control. Because control meant safety. She logged her work meticulously, double-checking readings others skimmed. When a pump vibrated half a degree off its normal range, she noticed. When a security door closed a fraction of a second too slowly, she adjusted it. Not because someone told her to, but because experience had taught her that small failures were rarely small for long. Most people assumed she was meticulous because she was afraid of losing her job. They were wrong. Renee was meticulous because she hated surprises. Once, months earlier, an emergency drill had gone sideways. A sensor misfired. Lights went out on 2 levels of the garage. People panicked. Renee hadn't. She'd moved through the darkness calmly, voice steady, guiding a dozen strangers to safety while security scrambled to understand what was happening. When the lights came back on, she stepped back into the background before anyone thought to ask her name. Later that night, alone in her apartment, she'd sat on the edge of her bed and waited for her hands to stop shaking. That part, no one saw. The building staff respected her. The night security guards trusted her instincts. When Renee said something wasn't right, people listened, quietly, carefully. Evan Cho, the campus security supervisor, listened the most. "You ever think about going management side?" he asked one evening as they stood near the service elevators, watching a cleaning crew rotate out. Renee shook her head. "I like fixing things," she said, "not managing people." It wasn't the whole truth. Managing people meant politics. Politics meant attention. Attention meant risk. She'd had enough of that for one lifetime. What Grant Halstead saw when he looked at Renee Caldwell was a woman who worked with her hands and kept her head down. Someone he could correct. Someone whose silence he could count on. What he didn't see were the scars hidden beneath long sleeves, the discipline in her posture, the way her eyes automatically tracked exits in any enclosed space. He didn't see the weight she carried when she chose patience over confrontation, restraint over reaction. He didn't see the choice she made every morning when she stepped into a world that assumed her compliance. Renee wasn't invisible because she lacked substance. She was invisible because she understood how dangerous visibility could be. And because she knew that when people finally noticed you, really noticed, you'd better be ready for what came next. The problem with silence is that people eventually mistake it for permission. For months, Renee Caldwell had absorbed the small humiliations, the way she absorbed everything else, quietly, efficiently, without reaction. The comments delivered with a smile, the jokes that landed just short of outright cruelty, the way certain executives spoke to her as if she were an inconvenience rather than a professional keeping their building alive. She told herself it didn't matter. She told herself that words were just noise, that dignity didn't require acknowledgement to exist. She had survived worse than this. She could survive a few careless men with polished shoes and empty authority. But there was a line, and Grant Halstead crossed it on a Tuesday morning in a corridor designed to impress visitors. Sunlight poured through floor-to-ceiling windows, reflecting off steel railings and imported stone. Executives moved in clusters, voices low, confidence rehearsed. Renee knelt beside a service panel near the elevators, tablet balanced on her knee, running diagnostics on a pressure anomaly she didn't like. "Still broken?" The voice came from behind her. Smooth, amused. Renee didn't look up. "Still under inspection," she said evenly. Grant stopped walking. That alone drew attention. "Interesting choice of words," he said. "Most people in your position would say, 'Yes, sir.'" A few heads turned. Someone slowed their pace. The air changed. Renee stood, careful not to rush, and faced him. She kept her voice level, her hands visible, her posture neutral. "I don't say 'sir' to people who aren't in my chain of command." It wasn't defiant. It wasn't loud. It was factual. The corridor went quiet in that way that only happens when everyone senses something about to break. Grant smiled, thin and precise. "You should be careful," he said. "Confidence looks a lot like attitude when it comes from the wrong place." There it was, the familiar framing, the unspoken hierarchy. Renee felt the weight of every eye in the hallway, felt the instinct to smooth things over rise in her chest, the old reflex to apologize for existing, to shrink. She didn't. "I'm careful about safety," she said, "and about doing my job correctly. That's what you're paying for." The word you landed softly and detonated. Grant stepped closer, invading the space she'd measured and maintained without conscious thought. His voice dropped, meant only for her, though everyone strained to hear. "Your job," he said, "is to remember where you fit in this building." Renee looked at him then, really looked. At the man who believed authority made him untouchable. At the entitlement wrapped in tailored fabric. At the fragile ego hiding behind corporate language. "My job," she replied, "is to make sure this place doesn't fail. Same as everyone else." Someone inhaled sharply. Another person looked down at their phone, pretending not to listen while memorizing every word. Grant's face tightened. For a moment, something ugly slipped through. Surprise, maybe even uncertainty. Then it vanished. "Get back to work," he said, loud enough for the hallway. "And try not to embarrass yourself again." He walked away to scattered, nervous movement. Conversations resumed in pieces. The moment fractured, then dissolved. Renee knelt back down and returned to her diagnostics, her hands steady, her breathing controlled. On the surface, nothing had changed, but inside, she felt it. The shift. She had crossed a line, not aggressively, not dramatically, but irreversibly. She had refused to accept a place assigned by someone who believed dignity was a privilege he could revoke. Grant Halstead didn't hear defiance. He heard challenge. And men like him didn't tolerate challenges from people they believed should remain invisible. Renee knew that too. And as she closed the access panel and stood, she understood something with absolute clarity. This was the last time she would step back. Whatever came next, she would meet it standing. Power rarely explodes without warning. More often, it closes a door first. Renee felt it the moment she stepped off the service elevator onto the executive mezzanine. The air up here was different, quieter, padded, perfumed faintly with money and confidence. Sound didn't echo the way it did below. Even footsteps seemed to soften themselves out of respect. She was halfway down the corridor when she heard her name. Renee. Not shouted, not sharp, controlled. She stopped, turned. Grant Halstead stood outside a glass-walled conference room, jacket removed, sleeves rolled just enough to suggest informality without surrendering authority. He smiled as if they shared a private understanding. "We need to talk," he said. Every instinct in her body took inventory. No witnesses. Frosted glass. Cameras angled toward the far end of the hall. An open door that could close too easily. "I'm on assignment," she replied. "You can submit a request through facilities." Grant chuckled, stepping aside and gesturing toward the room. "This won't take long." Renee hesitated for half a second. Long enough to register the risk, not long enough to justify refusal without consequence. She stepped inside. The door closed behind her with a soft, deliberate click. Grant didn't sit. He moved instead, slow and casual, positioning himself between her and the exit as if by accident. The glass walls blurred the outside world into shapes and motion without sound. Privacy without isolation. Plausible deniability. "You embarrassed me today," he said. Renee kept her hands loose at her sides, her posture relaxed. She didn't respond. "You did it in front of people," he continued. "Do you have any idea how that looks?" "I answered your question," she said, professionally. Grant's smile thinned. "That wasn't an answer, that was a performance." He stepped closer. Not touching. Not yet. Close enough that she could smell his cologne, sharp and expensive. "Let me explain something," he said quietly. "This campus runs because people like me make decisions. People like you execute them. That's the order. When you blur that line, things get uncomfortable." Renee met his gaze. She didn't flinch. "I don't blur lines," she said. "I maintain systems." Grant laughed softly. "You really believe that, don't you?" He leaned one hand against the table, trapping space, shrinking the room by inches. "You're a contractor," he went on. "No union protection, no internal advocacy. One email from me and your credentials get reviewed. Another and your access badge stops working." He watched her carefully, waiting for the flicker. Fear, panic, apology. It didn't come. "You could disappear from this industry," he said. Quietly, no drama, no lawsuit, just gone. Renee's chest tightened, not with fear, but with recognition. This was the threat, the real one. "I haven't done anything wrong," she said. Grant's eyes hardened. That's not the point. He straightened, frustration breaking through the polish. The point is that you forgot your place, and now you're forcing me to remind you. Renee shifted her weight, subtly increasing the distance between them. Her voice stayed calm, but something colder entered it. You're crossing a line. Grant smiled again, but it didn't reach his eyes. No, he said. You did. I'm just deciding what to do about it. Silence pressed in. The hum of the building, the faint movement beyond the glass. Then he stepped back, restoring space like a gift. Go finish your shift, he said. Think about what kind of future you want. He opened the door and held it for her. Renee walked out without another word. Her stride was steady, her expression unreadable. She didn't look back. But as the elevator doors closed and carried her downward, something settled in her bones with terrifying certainty. Grant Halstead wasn't finished. And whatever he was planning wouldn't come through official channels. It would come quietly, the way threats always did, right before they became something else. By the time Renee reached the lower levels of the campus, the building felt different. Not louder, not more dangerous, just watchful. The kind of quiet that followed a threat that hadn't yet decided what form it would take. She finished her shift on instinct, muscle memory carrying her through tasks she'd done 100 times before. Pressure checks, valve seals, digital logs, everything precise, everything documented. If something went wrong later, she wanted a record that proved she had done her job perfectly. Paper trails mattered. Or at least, that was what people liked to believe. In the security office, Evan Cho watched the monitors with a frown he couldn't quite smooth away. When Renee passed by, he swiveled in his chair. You okay? He asked. Renee hesitated. Evan was careful, decent. But decent men inside broken systems often overestimated what rules could protect. I had a conversation with Grant Halstead, she said. Evan's jaw tightened. That's never good. He implied my access might be reviewed. Evan exhaled slowly. I can file an incident note, loop in compliance, HR. Renee met his eyes. Would that stop him? Evan didn't answer right away. Down here, away from glass walls and investor language, honesty had more room to breathe. It would create a record, he said finally, which helps. Sometimes. Sometimes. Renee nodded. Do it. Evan pulled up the internal system, fingers moving quickly. Date, time, location, summary. He chose his words carefully, avoiding anything that could be dismissed as miscommunication. Workplace intimidation, improper conduct, power imbalance. When he finished, he leaned back. This goes to compliance counsel automatically. Marisol Vega, Renee said. Evan blinked. You know her? I know her reputation. That reputation reached Marisol before Renee did. An hour later, Renee sat across from her in a small office tucked behind legal operations. No windows, no branding slogans, just files, screens, and a woman who had learned the cost of truth the hard way. Marisol listened without interrupting. When Renee finished, she didn't immediately respond. She folded her hands and looked down at the desk, not at Renee. This isn't the first time, she said quietly. Renee felt something drop in her chest. With me? With him, Marisol corrected. Different targets, same pattern. Then why is he still here? Marisol looked up. Her expression wasn't cynical. It was tired. Because every complaint before yours ended the same way, she said. Contract not renewed, settlement agreement, non-disclosure, silence. Renee absorbed that. The weight of all the voices that had come before hers, swallowed neatly. So the system works, Renee said, just not for us. Marisol didn't argue. Filing reports is still the right thing to do, she said. But you need to understand something. Documentation doesn't stop powerful men. It just determines how much damage they can deny later. Renee leaned back in her chair. The room felt smaller. What happens now? Marisol hesitated. If he's smart, he'll back off. And if he's not? Marisol's voice dropped. Then he'll move off record. Renee thought of the closed door, the blocked exit, the way Grant had smiled when he said, future. I think he already has, she said. Marisol studied her carefully then, as if seeing her fully for the first time. You're not scared, she observed. I'm cautious, Renee replied. There's a difference. Marisol nodded once. If anything else happens, anything, come to me, even if it feels small. Renee stood to leave. In the hallway outside, people moved past her carrying coffee, laptops, plans for the evening. The building hummed with the illusion of normalcy. Somewhere above them, Grant Halstead was likely deciding his next move. Renee understood something now with painful clarity. Paper trails were important, but paper didn't stop fists. It didn't stop quiet retaliation, and it didn't protect people the system had already decided were expendable. As she stepped back into the service elevator, Renee felt the old instinct stir, the one she'd spent years learning to quiet. When rules failed, preparation mattered more. And whatever Grant Halstead was planning, she intended to be ready. The knock on Renee Caldwell's apartment door came too late to be casual and too soft to be confident. Renee had been sitting at her small kitchen table, lights dimmed, a mug of untouched tea cooling beside her. The city hummed beyond the window, sirens in the distance, rain tapping the glass like nervous fingers. When the knock came again, she didn't jump. She stood, slow and deliberate, and checked the peephole. A young woman stood in the hallway, shoulders hunched inside a thin coat, one hand clenched around her phone like a lifeline. Her other hand was shaking. Renee cracked the door but kept the chain on. Yes? The woman swallowed. My name is Talia Brooks. I work in payroll at Halstead Urban. Her voice wavered. I think I'm in trouble, and I think you are too. Renee studied her face. Fear, yes, but beneath it, resolve. The kind that only appeared after fear had already lost. Why do you think that? Renee asked. Talia glanced down the hallway, then back up. Because I heard something I wasn't supposed to hear. And once you hear it, you can't unhear it. Renee unhooked the chain and opened the door. Talia stepped inside like someone entering a courtroom instead of an apartment. She perched on the edge of a chair, hands knotted together, breath shallow. I shouldn't be here, she said immediately. I could lose my job. I could get sued. But I can't pretend I don't know what I know. Renee didn't rush her. Silence, she had learned, was often the safest place for truth to land. Yesterday, Talia continued, I was reconciling vendor payments. One of the shell accounts flagged, consulting services, no description. When I traced it back, it didn't go through legal. It went through an executive discretionary channel. Renee felt a slow tightening behind her ribs. Grant Halstead, Talia nodded. I didn't even mean to listen. He was on the phone in the corridor outside payroll. He said, her voice broke. She inhaled, steadied herself. He said someone needed to be reminded of her place, that it would be handled quietly, off the books. The words settled into the room like smoke. Did he say my name? Renee asked. No, Talia admitted, but he said the contractor. And then he laughed. Renee leaned back in her chair. For a moment, the apartment felt very far away from Seattle, very far away from now. I know you don't know me, Talia said quickly, and I know this sounds insane, but I watched how he talks to you. Everyone does. And when I heard that call, I knew it wasn't just bullying anymore. Her gaze drifted to the shelf near Renee's couch, where a small shadow box sat half hidden behind books. Medals, ribbons, a folded flag. Oh, Talia whispered. You were military. Renee followed her eyes. Once. That changes things, Talia said almost to herself. Renee shook her head. It really doesn't. Talia looked up confused. It just means I know how fast situations like this can turn, Renee continued, and how expensive bravery can be. Talia's hands shook harder. I don't want to be brave. I just don't want to be complicit. That word, complicit, hung heavy between them. Renee saw herself in Talia then, not as she was now, but as she had once been. Younger, uncertain, standing at the edge of something she couldn't walk away from without losing a piece of herself. You did the right thing by coming here, Renee said, But you need to understand what this means. Talia nodded. I already do. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of what had been said pressing down on them both. Outside, a car passed, tires hissing through wet pavement. Inside, a line had been crossed. Talia Brooks had spoken up. And in doing so, she had made herself visible to a system that punished visibility ruthlessly. Renee met her eyes, steady and unflinching. From this point on, she said quietly, we don't assume the system will protect us. Talia swallowed. Then what do we assume? Renee didn't answer right away. She looked at the metals, the door, the city beyond the glass. We assume, she said finally, that truth is dangerous, and we decide whether we're willing to protect it anyway. Talia's hands stopped shaking, not because she wasn't afraid anymore, but because she had made her choice. Movements rarely announce themselves. They begin quietly, in hallways meant for passing through, in late-night messages sent and unsent, in the shared understanding that something is wrong and pretending otherwise is no longer an option. By morning, Renee Caldwell's name was moving through the campus like an underground current. Not loudly, not recklessly, carefully. Evan Cho was the first to notice it. The way maintenance techs lingered a little longer near the security office. The way night staff asked pointed questions about camera maintenance schedules. The way people who usually avoided eye contact now held it, searching his face for confirmation. Something was happening. At noon, Marisol Vega closed her office door and made a call she delayed for years. Noah Iyer answered on the second ring. If this is about Halstead, he said, I already pulled the logs. Marisol closed her eyes. How bad? Bad enough that if anyone ever sees the whole picture, it's over, Noah replied. But seeing it is the problem. By late afternoon, 6 people sat in a windowless break room on the lower level, an unremarkable space that smelled faintly of burnt coffee and disinfectant. No executives ever came down here. That was the point. Renee stood near the wall, arms folded, watching them arrive one by one. Evan, Marisol, Talia, Noah, Darnell Price from maintenance, broad-shouldered, gray at the temples, eyes sharp with a kind of anger that had fermented for years. And one empty chair, deliberately left open, a silent reminder that others were too afraid or too exposed to join. No one spoke at first. Then Darnell broke the silence. I've been fixing this building since before Grant Halstead could spell urban redevelopment, he said, and I've watched good people get pushed out for less than what he did yesterday. Talia's voice was quiet, but steady. If he's already paying someone off book, this isn't going to stop at intimidation. Renee nodded once. Which is why no one here is going to confront him. No threats, no heroics. Evan frowned. Then what are we doing? We're bearing witness, Marisol said, legally, cleanly, together. Noah leaned forward, fingers laced. The garage camera outage scheduled for tomorrow night? It's fake maintenance. I can mirror the feeds to a secure server before they go dark. Time-stamped, encrypted, untouchable. Darnell let out a low whistle. That kind of evidence gets people fired. It also gets people protected, Marisol replied, if it exists. Renee spoke then, her voice calm but unyielding. No one follows me. No one intervenes. If something happens, your job is to record, not rescue. Silence followed. That's not how community works, Evan said quietly. Renee met his eyes. It is if you want this to end without more people getting hurt. They understood then what she was offering and what she was refusing. She wasn't asking for saviors, she was asking for truth. Around that table sat people who had spent their careers staying inside lines drawn by others. People who had watched injustice pass by because stepping in felt too expensive. Now the cost of doing nothing was higher. Marisol gathered the files in front of her. If this goes wrong, she said, we all lose something. Darnell nodded. And if it goes right, Renee answered, then the next person won't have to sit in this room. They left separately, at different times, through different stairwells. By nightfall, the campus looked the same as it always had. Lights glowing, glass shining, order intact. But beneath it, in places cameras didn't usually linger, and executives never noticed, something fragile and dangerous had taken shape. Not a rebellion, a community. And once people stopped believing they were alone, the system that depended on their isolation began to crack. That night, Renee Caldwell didn't sleep. She lay on her back in the dark, listening to the steady rhythm of the city outside her apartment, traffic hissing over wet pavement, a distant siren rising and falling, the low mechanical breath of Seattle after midnight. Her ceiling fan turned slowly, casting shadows that shifted just enough to keep her mind alert. This was the danger zone. Not the threat itself, but the waiting. She'd lived through enough close calls to know that fear didn't arrive screaming. It arrived quietly, disguised as logic, whispering that maybe she was overreacting, that maybe Grant Halstead would decide the risk wasn't worth it, that maybe tomorrow would look like every other day. That was how people got hurt. Renee sat up and turned on the lamp. The light was soft, deliberate. She didn't rush. Panic wasted energy, and energy was a resource. From the hall closet, she pulled out a small case she hadn't opened in years. Inside were items arranged with almost ceremonial care. Not weapons, not trophies, but tools. Pepper gel, a high-lumen tactical flashlight, a personal alarm loud enough to fracture attention, gloves, a spare battery pack, non-lethal, intentional. Her hands moved with practiced calm, checking expiration dates, testing switches. Each movement grounded her, anchored her to the present instead of the memories that tried to claw their way up when she slowed down. She paused, fingers resting on the edge of the case. Once, a long time ago, preparation had meant something very different. It had meant accepting that violence was not just possible, but likely. That survival might require choices that stayed with you long after the threat was gone. She closed her eyes. Not this time. Renee had rules now. Rule 1, escape was always the objective. Rule 2, de-escalation came before dominance. Rule 3, if force became unavoidable, it would be precise, proportional, and only to stop the threat. She repeated them silently until her pulse steadied. Across the city, Grant Halstead was likely rehearsing his own version of control. Calls made, favors cashed in, confidence restored by the illusion that other people were pieces he could move at will. He didn't understand something fundamental. Renee wasn't preparing to win. She was preparing to survive. At 2:17 a.m., her phone vibrated. A single message from Noah. Camera maintenance confirmed for tomorrow night. Mirrored feeds secure. No alerts triggered. Renee exhaled slowly. Another message followed. This one from Evan. Security rotation adjusted. I'll be off-site after 10. Witnesses accounted for. Witnesses. That word mattered. She wasn't alone in this anymore, even if she would stand alone when it counted. Renee stood and walked to the window. Below, the city spread out in uneven light, beautiful and indifferent. Somewhere beneath all that glass and steel was a parking structure that most people treated as an afterthought. She suspected Grant Halstead was counting on that. She pressed her palm to the cool glass. Rules of engagement weren't about aggression. They were about restraint under pressure, about knowing when not to act, and when hesitation became its own kind of failure. Tomorrow night, she would go to work like she always did. Same uniform, same badge, same quiet competence. If nothing happened, she would go home and keep living. If something did, Renee turned off the light and let the room fall back into darkness. Then she would follow her rules, even if no one else did. The garage always felt colder at night, not because the temperature changed, Seattle's damp chill clung to everything, but because the space emptied of the illusion that people were in control. In daylight, it was just concrete and painted arrows. At midnight, it became something else, a cavern full of blind corners, sealed doors, and echoes that made every footstep sound like it belonged to someone behind you. Renee Caldwell pushed through the service entrance with her tool bag on one shoulder and her tablet in hand. The campus above glowed like a postcard, warm lobby lights, polished glass, The kind of calm that made investors feel safe. Down here, calm was just camouflage. Her badge beeped. The door unlocked. She stepped inside. The first thing she noticed was the silence. Normally, the underground levels carried a background hum. Fans cycling, security radios crackling, the faint whine of cameras panning. Tonight it felt like someone had turned the volume down on the world. Renee checked her tablet. Camera maintenance, scheduled. Duration, 11:30 p.m. to 2:30 a.m. Authorized by facilities. She stared at the line long enough to feel anger rise, hot and sharp, and then forced it back down. Anger made you loud. Loud made you predictable. She walked deeper into the garage, boots striking wet concrete. Water dripped from overhead pipes in slow, irregular clicks, like a clock with a broken second hand. The fluorescent lights cast everything in a pale wash that never reached the corners. Shadows gathered where pillars met ceiling, where parked cars slept like silent animals. Halfway down the ramp, she stopped. There, above the painted Level P3 sign, was a camera mount. The lens was still there, but the tiny red indicator light was dead. The garage had gone dark. Not in the way the lights go out, in the way truth does when someone decides they'd rather not be seen. Renee's phone buzzed once in her pocket. She didn't reach for it immediately. She listened first. A far-off sound, metal on metal. A door closing or opening. Her heartbeat remained steady, but her senses sharpened the way a blade sharpened when drawn across stone. She turned slowly, scanning mirrors, windshields, reflective surfaces that might reveal movement before it became close. Nothing. Still, the space felt occupied. She continued, angling toward a utility closet where the fire suppression control valves were housed. Her work order was legitimate. There had been a pressure anomaly. If she didn't verify it and something happened later, she would be blamed. That was how systems like this functioned. The vulnerable were responsible for the failures of the powerful. She reached the closet door and paused. The lock had fresh scratches around it. Not enough for anyone careless to notice. Enough for her. Renee crouched, fingers brushing the metal lightly. Recent. Very recent. She straightened, inhaled slowly through her nose, and forced herself to think in steps instead of feelings. Step 1. Confirm the environment. Step 2. Avoid being cornered. Step 3. If movement happens, create distance. She opened the closet. Inside, the air smelled of dust and chemical suppressant. Pipes lined the wall like arteries. She moved in, shut the door halfway, not fully, never fully, and checked the gauge. The reading was stable. So why the work order? Her stomach tightened. Because the work order wasn't for the system, it was for her. A soft click sounded behind her. Renee didn't spin. She didn't gasp. She simply reached into her bag and wrapped her fingers around the tactical flashlight. The click came again, closer now. The half-open door began to drift inward, as if pushed by a draft that didn't exist. Renee stepped back, placing herself at an angle that kept the door in view without exposing her entire body. Her thumb rested on the flashlight switch, not to use light, but to use sound, bright enough to blind, sharp enough to disrupt. Then, faintly, she heard voices, low, male, controlled, not employees talking about a late shift. Men trying not to sound like they were hunting. Renee's mouth went dry, but her mind stayed clear. This was it. The moment the corporate world pretended never happened. The moment the garage went dark on purpose. Renee held her breath, listening as footsteps moved across wet concrete, unhurried and confident, like men who believed the absence of cameras meant the absence of consequences. And somewhere above, in a tower of glass and lies, Grant Halstead waited for the lesson he'd ordered to be delivered. The men didn't rush. That was the first thing Renee noticed as the footsteps grew clearer, measured, unhurried, confident in a way that only came from preparation. Random criminals moved fast, driven by adrenaline and fear. These men moved like they had a schedule, like they knew she was here. Renee eased the utility closet door open another inch, just enough to see without being seen. 3 figures emerged from between parked cars, their silhouettes fractured by concrete pillars and shadow. Dark jackets, gloves, no visible logos. One of them spoke quietly into an earpiece. Target confirmed. Level P3. Target. The word landed with a sickening weight. This wasn't a mugging. This wasn't wrong place, wrong time. This was ordered. Renee's fingers tightened around the flashlight. Her pulse slowed, a strange calm settling over her as her mind shifted into a different gear. Not panic, not rage, assessment. 3 visible, possibly more. Coordinated spacing. 1 watching the ramp, 1 scanning exits, 1 advancing straight toward her position. She stepped backwards silently, retreating deeper into the shadowed side of the garage, keeping a concrete pillar between herself and the advancing man. Distance mattered. Angles mattered. The man stopped abruptly, as if sensing movement. "Don't run," he called out, his voice smooth, almost conversational. "This doesn't have to get messy." Renee didn't answer. Another voice joined in, closer now. "We just need to talk. 5 minutes. Then you walk away. That's it." Talk. Always talk first. Words as camouflage for what came next. Renee felt the urge to laugh rise in her throat, not from humor, but from the sheer familiarity of the tactic. She swallowed it down and kept moving, her boots silent on damp concrete. She reached into her pocket and pressed the personal alarm once, briefly, just enough to send a sharp, ultrasonic pulse that wouldn't register as an alarm, but would trigger a timestamp on Noah's mirrored system. "Proof." "You hear that?" one of the men muttered. "Probably a sensor," another replied. "Keep moving." They spread out, tightening the net. Renee's chest tightened, not with fear, but with something closer to grief. For how deliberate this was, for how much effort had gone into hurting one person who'd refused to stay quiet. "Renee Caldwell," the first man called, using her full name now. "We know who you are. This isn't personal." It never was. To the people paid to do it. She stopped moving, not because she was trapped, but because she chose to be heard. "This is personal to me," she said, her voice steady, carrying farther than she expected in the open space. "And you don't want to be here." The men froze. They hadn't expected her to speak. One of them scoffed. "You think you're in control?" "No," Renee replied. "I think you are." Silence stretched between them, heavy and electric. For a moment, she saw it flicker across one man's face. The doubt. The awareness that something about this wasn't adding up. "Last chance," the lead man said, harder now. "We're not here to ruin your life, just to make a point." Renee's jaw tightened. The man stepped forward. That was when the garage lights surged. Not fully, just enough to brighten the shadows, to ruin the darkness they were counting on. Somewhere above, a system had been nudged back to life. Renee felt it then. Not relief, not rescue. Presence. She wasn't alone in this space, even if she was standing alone. The men exchanged quick glances. Their formation faltered for half a second. Enough. Renee raised the flashlight and triggered it. One sharp burst of blinding white light and sound, aimed directly at the advancing man's eyes. He cursed, stumbling back, hands flying up instinctively. Renee moved, not toward them, away. She ran, not blindly, but with purpose, angling toward a wider lane, keeping obstacles between herself and pursuit. Her breath stayed controlled. Her steps were measured. This wasn't about winning. It was about surviving long enough for the truth to exist. Behind her, the men recovered quickly. "After her!" someone shouted. Footsteps. Renee's muscles burned as she sprinted, her mind calculating turns, distances, escape routes. She reached a ramp and veered sharply, disappearing from their line of sight. As she ran, one thought anchored her, steady as a heartbeat. This wasn't random, but and somewhere, unseen but unflinching, witnesses were watching the system finally reveal what it had always been willing to do. Renee didn't run like someone panicking. She ran like someone who knew exactly what panic cost. Her feet struck the ramp in a steady rhythm, breath controlled, shoulders loose. She wasn't trying to disappear into the dark. She was trying to create distance, space to think, space to choose. Behind her, the men followed with heavier steps, faster, louder. They were chasing the idea of an easy target. They were about to learn what happened when an easy target refused to behave. At the top of the ramp, Renee cut left into a lane of parked cars and dropped low behind an SUV. She killed her flashlight. In the sudden dimness, she became a shadow among shadows. Footsteps thundered past, overshooting her position. "Where'd she go?" a voice hissed. "She can't be far," another snapped. "Check between the rows." Renee stayed still, listening. The garage was a map of sound now. Rubber soles squeaking on wet concrete, a jacket brushing against metal, a hand dragging along a car hood. She waited until they were close enough to hear their breathing. Then she moved, quiet, fast, decisive, slipping out from behind the SUV and angling toward the emergency pull station mounted on a pillar. She didn't pull it. Not yet. She reached it, set her palm flat against the metal housing, and felt the vibration of the building's internal systems through her skin. The fire suppression pipes overhead, the alarm circuits, the emergency locks. Tools. She could do a lot of damage here if she wanted to. And that was the most dangerous temptation of all. Renee forced herself back to her rules. Escape, de-escalate, proportional. A figure emerged from the darkness and spotted her. "There!" he shouted. He lunged toward her, faster than the others, eager to be the one who handled it. His hand shot out, aimed for her shoulder, her collar, something to grab and control. Renee shifted her weight and stepped inside his reach instead of away from it. Her flashlight flashed up, not as light this time, but as impact. A sharp strike to the forearm, a joint forced the wrong way. The man grunted, staggered, shock flooding his face as his hand went numb. Renee didn't gloat. She didn't linger. She stepped back and spoke, voice low but clear. "Walk away." The man blinked, confused, as if the script had changed and no one had handed him the new lines. "You're supposed to be scared," he muttered. "I am," Renee said honestly. "That's why you should leave." Behind him, the others closed in, forming a loose half circle. They were adjusting now, less swagger, more caution. Renee could feel it. The moment their confidence started to wobble, the switch from prey to problem. The lead man raised both hands in a mock gesture of calm. "Nobody has to get hurt," he said. "We're here to deliver a message. You cooperate, you go home." "I'm already going home," Renee replied, "without your message." She shifted sideways, keeping a pillar to her left, an open space to her right. She wanted room to move, room to run. The lead man's smile faded. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." Renee's eyes flicked to his waist, a bulge under the jacket. Not a phone, not a wallet. Her stomach tightened. "You brought a gun," she said, not as an accusation, an observation. The man's expression changed, a fraction of a second, enough to confirm it. "It's just insurance," he said. Insurance. That was what predators called it when they planned to take choice away. Renee felt her mouth go dry. If a gun entered the equation, her rules shifted. Proportional didn't mean polite. Proportional meant alive. Her phone buzzed once, short, coded. A single vibration, then silence. Noah's signal. Recording confirmed. Witnesses ready. Renee's chest tightened with something like gratitude and something like terror. Because now whatever happened next would exist. It couldn't be erased with a contract termination or a quiet settlement. The lead man reached inside his jacket. Renee moved first. She slammed her palm down on the alarm pull and yanked. The garage erupted. A siren wailed, savage and immediate. Red lights strobed. Doors clanked as emergency protocols engaged. Somewhere above, sprinklers primed and valves shifted, the building preparing itself as if for fire. The men jerked back, startled, eyes widening. "What the hell?" one shouted. Renee's voice cut through the chaos. "Leave. Now." For a heartbeat, it almost worked. The noise, the sudden exposure, the realization that this wasn't the quiet corner they'd been promised, it shook them. Then the lead man's hand came out, holding a weapon. And the moment the metal caught the flashing red light, Every possibility narrowed into one brutal truth. This was no longer intimidation. This was life or death. And Renee Caldwell, the woman they thought was invisible, became the last thing they ever expected to face in a corporate parking garage. Someone who knew exactly how to survive the worst night of her life. The first gunshot didn't sound like it did in movies. It didn't crack cleanly. It didn't feel distant. It slammed into the garage like a physical force, thunder trapped in concrete, followed by a sickening silence where every nerve in Renee's body tried to decide whether she was already dead. She wasn't. The bullet struck the pillar beside her, spraying grit across her cheek. Renee dropped low behind the concrete, heart pounding once, hard, then settling into a cold, focused rhythm that felt almost inhuman. Not courage, training. The strobing red alarms painted the space in pulses, turning the men into flickering shadows. The sirens screamed overhead, swallowing words, turning every shouted command into fractured noise. Renee pressed her back to the pillar and inhaled through her nose, slow and deliberate, as if breath alone could hold the world together. She did not want this. She had tried to end it with light, with noise, with the one language buildings understood when humans refused to. But the gun changed the math. The lead man's voice cut through the chaos, distorted by the alarms. She pulled the alarm. Move! Boots splashed through shallow runoff. The men were shifting positions now, trying to flank, trying to trap her between cars and walls. They weren't amateurs. They were practiced enough to be dangerous, not disciplined enough to be predictable. Renee's mind worked in angles, in distance. Open lane to the right. Stairwell door 30 yards. Too far, too exposed. Elevator bay, death trap. Her hand went to her pocket, closing around pepper gel. She could incapacitate one, maybe two. Not all of them, not with a gun in play. Another shot rang out, closer. Glass shattered somewhere. A car alarm began to wail, joining the siren in a chorus of panic. Renee swallowed hard, tasting metal. This was the moment people never understood when they spoke about self-defense, like it was clean. Self-defense wasn't a victory. It was a debt your body paid in full. She moved low and fast, sliding behind a parked sedan, keeping the engine block between herself and the shooter. Her flashlight flashed once, brief, controlled, catching the faces of two men near the ramp. One looked furious. The other looked terrified. His hands shook as he raised something heavy, maybe a baton, maybe a tire iron, like he was trying to convince himself he could do this. Renee's voice came out steady, even as her stomach twisted. "You don't have to," she called. The terrified man hesitated. For one heartbeat, the world offered an exit. Then the lead man barked, "Stop thinking," and the hesitant man surged forward like shame had pushed him. Renee waited until he crossed the line where his weapon could reach her. Then she acted, sharp, precise, using the car's open door as a barrier, driving pepper gel across his face in a tight arc. He screamed and dropped to his knees, clawing at his eyes, blinded and coughing. Non-lethal, rule intact. But the lead man saw it and snapped. He moved differently now. No more intimidation, no more message, just elimination. He fired again. Renee ducked, the bullet punching into the sedan's metal with a violent pop. The sound of it was wrong, too close, too final. Renee's lungs tightened. Her hands did not shake. She grabbed the door edge and slammed it shut, then crawled along the opposite side of the car, keeping low. She needed to reach the stairwell. She needed distance. Barriers, a way out. A figure appeared near the aisle ahead, silhouetted in the flashing red lights. Another man, taller, athletic, raising his hands, palms open. "Wait!" he shouted. "Wait, this is going sideways." His voice carried something Renee hadn't expected to hear from someone who had come to hurt her. Regret. He looked from the lead man to Renee, panic sharpening his face. "We weren't supposed to." The lead man turned on him like a predator, annoyed by weakness. "Shut up." The tall man backed away, shaking his head. "No, man, this isn't..." He started to run. The lead man lifted the gun. Time slowed to a crawl. Renee saw what was about to happen. The bullet, the fall, the inevitable story that would follow. Random violence, unclear circumstances, tragic outcome. A narrative that would swallow truth whole. She made a decision she would hate herself for, no matter what happened next. Renee rose from behind the car just enough to be seen and shouted, "Drop it!" The lead man swung toward her. His finger tightened. And in that fractional instant, Renee did the only thing that could stop him from firing again. She struck him hard with a tool ripped from the emergency equipment mounted nearby. The impact was blunt and decisive. The gun skittered across wet concrete. The man collapsed with a sound that didn't feel like triumph, only consequence. Silence didn't come. The alarm still screamed, but something inside Renee went quiet anyway. The kind of quiet that arrived after you crossed a point you can't uncross. The tall man stared at the fallen leader, then at Renee, horror widening his eyes. Renee didn't chase him. She pointed toward the exit ramp with a flashlight beam. "Go," she said. "Run." He ran. One attacker down and blinded. One down and critically hurt. One fleeing into the night. Proof that the story wasn't a slaughter, not a fantasy. It was chaos. It was survival. Renee's knees threatened to buckle as the adrenaline faltered, and for one terrifying moment, she felt the cost of staying alive rise up inside her like a wave. Not fear of dying, fear of what she had just done to live. Her phone vibrated once. Another short signal, steady as a heartbeat in the madness. Someone was recording. Someone was witnessing. Renee pressed a hand against her chest, forcing air into her lungs, forcing herself to keep moving. Because the danger wasn't over. And because the price of survival, she knew, was rarely paid all at once. It came later, quietly, when the sirens stopped, the lights went normal, and you were left alone with what your hands remembered. Grant Halstead arrived to chaos the way powerful men always did, late, indignant, and certain the rules would bend back into place the moment he spoke. Police lights splashed red and blue across the glass facade of Halstead Urban Holdings, turning the building into a distorted mirror of itself. Fire alarms wailed intermittently as first responders moved in disciplined lines, radios crackling, boots echoing through the garage that had been so carefully darkened an hour earlier. Grant pushed past the barricade with a scowl sharp enough to cut. "What is going on here?" he demanded. "Who authorized this shutdown?" A uniformed officer stepped in front of him. "Sir, this area is restricted." Grant straightened, every inch the executive who had never been told no. "I'm Grant Halstead, COO of this company. I expect an explanation." He didn't look at the injured men being loaded onto stretchers. He didn't look at the shattered glass, the scorched concrete, the water pooling around discarded equipment. He looked for control. And then he saw her. Renee Caldwell sat on the edge of a concrete barrier, wrapped in a thermal blanket, her face pale under the harsh lights. A medic crouched beside her, checking her vitals, speaking softly. Her hands were steady now, resting on her knees, but her eyes were distant, focused inward, as if replaying something no one else could see. For a split second, Grant's composure fractured. Not fear, disbelief. She was supposed to be gone, broken, silenced in a way that didn't leave fingerprints. Instead, she was alive, and the men he'd paid to make this disappear were bleeding in public. Grant masked it quickly, turning back to the officers. "This woman," he said, nodding toward Renee without using her name, "is a contractor. I want to know why she's being treated like a victim when my property has been destroyed." The detective nearest him, a graying man with tired eyes, in the posture of someone who had seen too many lies, studied Grant carefully. "Sir," he said, "are you aware that this incident appears to be targeted?" Grant scoffed. "That's absurd. Seattle's full of crime. She was in the wrong place at the wrong time." The detective didn't respond immediately. He gestured instead, and a younger officer approached carrying a tablet. "Mr. Halstead," the detective continued, We're reviewing footage recovered from the building's internal systems. Footage that wasn't supposed to exist. Grant's jaw tightened. Our cameras were under maintenance. So we were told, the detective replied. Yet we have time-stamped recordings showing coordinated movement, prior surveillance, and attempted coercion. The tablet screen turned toward Grant. He saw himself. Not tonight, but days earlier. A hallway. A phone pressed to his ear. His voice low, confident, amused. Handle it quietly. She needs to be reminded. No paperwork. Grant's breath caught. That footage is doctored, he snapped. This is corporate espionage. You can't... Sir, the detective interrupted, his tone firm now. We also have financial records. Payments routed through a shell account, authorized by you. Another figure stepped forward, Marisol Vega, her face drawn but resolute. She held a folder thick with documents. Detective, she said, this contains prior complaints, settlement patterns, and internal memos demonstrating a consistent attempt to suppress allegations against Mr. Halstead. Behind her, Noah Iyer stood quietly, hands clasped, eyes fixed on the ground. Evan Cho hovered near the security desk, his face tight with restrained anger. Talia Brooks stood just behind Marisol, shoulders squared, fear still present, but no longer in control. Grant looked around then, truly looked, not at subordinates, at witnesses, people he had assumed would stay silent because silence had always been cheaper than truth. This is a setup, Grant said, his voice rising. They're conspiring. I want my lawyer. You'll get one, the detective said. But first, I need to ask you something very simple. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only Grant could hear. Why were men hired to confront a contractor in a camera-free garage? Grant opened his mouth. No answer came. Because for the first time in his life, the story he'd built, of power without consequence, of authority without accountability, had collapsed under the weight of evidence. The detective straightened. Mr. Grant Halstead, you are being detained for questioning in connection with conspiracy, coercion, and aggravated assault. Handcuffs clicked shut around wrists that had signed contracts worth millions. Grant Halstead stared at them as if they were a foreign object, something meant for other people. As officers led him away, his gaze flicked once more to Renee. She didn't look back. Because the most devastating consequence for a man like Grant wasn't arrest. It was irrelevance. And as the garage filled with professionals documenting every crack, every stain, every recorded truth, the man who believed he owned consequences learned too late that ownership had limits, especially when the invisible decided to be seen. Justice didn't arrive like a victory parade. It came slowly, in fragments, in interviews that asked the same questions in different words, in legal language that stripped emotion from trauma and reduced survival to timelines and evidence logs, in sleepless nights where Renee Caldwell lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her body safe at last while her mind replayed every second she wished she could forget. The city called her brave. The internet called her a hero. Renee didn't use either word. Heroes, she knew, were supposed to stop violence before it happened. Heroes were supposed to walk away clean. What she felt wasn't triumph, it was weight. The kind that settled into your bones and reminded you that staying alive always left marks. Grant Halstead's trial moved quickly once the evidence surfaced. The recordings, the payments, the witnesses who no longer stood alone. His lawyers argued influence, misunderstanding, coincidence. Every story a man told when he'd never expected the truth to be documented. The jury didn't buy it. The sentence was measured, unspectacular, real, and that was enough. Halstead Urban Holdings released statements about values and culture shifts. New policies were announced, external oversight installed. Some executives resigned, others stayed and learned what accountability felt like when it finally arrived. None of it erased the night in the garage, but it changed what came after. Renee left the company quietly. No speeches, no headlines. She took time, real time, to heal. Therapy, long walks in the rain, learning how to exist without constant vigilance. Months later, she started something small, a consulting practice focused on safety, compliance, and de-escalation, on helping organizations fix what they ignored before it turned dangerous. She didn't market herself as a survivor. She marketed herself as someone who understood systems and how they failed people. Talia Brooks moved into compliance work, helping others speak up without standing alone. Evan Cho was promoted, this time with authority that meant something. Marisol Vega taught corporate ethics at a law school that asked her not to soften the truth. The community that formed in the shadows didn't dissolve. It evolved. Renee still had nights when alarms lived in her dreams. Still had moments when her hands remembered before her mind could catch up. Healing wasn't linear. Justice didn't fix everything. But it fixed enough. Enough that the next person wouldn't be invisible. Enough that silence would cost more than speaking. Enough that power learned, painfully, that consequences couldn't always be outsourced. This wasn't a fantasy where evil vanished and scars disappeared. This was something rarer. A story where truth survived, where dignity held, where justice didn't look like perfection, but looked like progress. And if this story moved you, challenged you, or made you think about the quiet injustices people endure every day, take a moment now. Like this story, share your thoughts in the comments. Follow the channel for more stories that don't just entertain, but matter. Because sometimes the most powerful stories aren't about winning. They're about refusing to disappear.